All right, welcome to a farming episode of Reconnect. This episode, I am going to be speaking with a farmer from Murrieta, California. His name's Paul Greive. I know him from college. I went to Concordia Irvine, met him there when he was a freshman. I was a transfer sophomore from Tennessee. He was from Seattle, Washington, and now we're both still living in Southern California. So for this one, I know he has become a farmer, and he has shared with me that the design that they use with their farming is based on a design that they see in nature, and that this design that they see in nature, they credit to be a design which God put in place, and that most farming today does not follow this design or this pattern, and because of that, our food is not as good, and our land is not as good as it should be either. And so they are working to bring about a farming food revolution. So I'm going to call him and just spend most of the time actually talking about the farming process, and hopefully through this let you see the design that God has put in place for our ecosystem, for our farming, for our food, and even for how our bodies work. And from that, hopefully be able to glorify God. Because as you know, the goal of Reconnect is to share and defend the gospel. So we're going to pick up on that near the end of the show, hopefully after learning all we can about Primal Pastures and what Paul and his family is doing in Murrieta, California with Primal Pastures. And you can check out their site at primalpastures.com, also linked with episode 42 of Reconnect at andyrasman.com. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and give Paul a call and see what he's up to right now on the farm.
Andy.
Hey, what's up, Paul? How you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
Good. You at the farm right now, or where are you at?
You there?
Yeah, I'm here. Are you at the farm right now?
Yeah. No, I just came home. I got to watch my son during his nap time here, so home for a little bit.
Nice. Well, thanks for taking time to talk. You're on episode 42 of Reconnect.
Thanks for having me. Sweet.
Very cool. So all I've told the listeners so far is that you're a farmer in Murrieta, California, and that's about all they know. So I'm just going to maybe ask you first what Primal Pastures is and who you all are. And I think this is going to be really good for listeners because I kind of told them that I just want us to really learn what you guys are doing because I think it can be helpful for our bodies and for our land and even point to and glorify God.
Nice, man. I like it. Well, first of all, me and Andy go way back. Back in the college days, there was this crazy guy from Tennessee that was always going around and doing all these shenanigans. And so we eventually linked up and we did a lot of crazy stuff together. Ended up on radio shows and Chinese clubs and all kinds of we had some pretty good adventures back in the day, man. So it's definitely good to hear from you again.
I know. Good to talk to you.
After college, I was just really not super interested in doing accounting, which is what I studied. So I went to the military, had a great time, like really, really enjoyed it as a Marine officer. Got out and started having some health problems with arthritis and some different things. And started learning about real food and what that really looked like. And I started to learn how brutal the food is in our country and kind of the crisis that our food systems come into. And so my family, honestly, just kind of out of a joke, and we thought it'd be kind of fun to get some chickens for our backyard or whatever. So we did that, and with, no experience, no farming background at all, ordered these 50 chicks, and we put a couple things up on Facebook saying, hey, if anybody out there possibly wants to buy, one of these things, it would help us to offset the cost and you'll get some really good chicken. And sure enough, like all 50 of them sold within the first 2 weeks of even having them.
Wow.
And so the next time we did 100 and then we did 200 and then 500 and then 1,000. And then, pretty soon it was like really starting to look like a business. So Primal Pastures it was totally born out of, the idea that we want to raise animals the way nature intended and the way God kind of intended these animals to live, which is outside, on grass, fresh air, and sunshine. Really, we call it organic, biodynamic, sustainable, grass-fed, grass-finished, all this stuff. But 100 years ago, this stuff was just called chicken and eggs. So we're sort of just trying to bring the food system back like 100 years to what it was before, which was really great.
Well, what's it like now? What's if I go to my local grocery store, whatever it may be, Trader Joe's, Kroger's, Ralph's, Publix, whatever they're called, because I know every state has different ones. The average eggs that I buy, if they're not labeled organic, what am I receiving? And also, after I hear that, I'd love to hear more on just what organic typically is, if that's even what it's supposed to be.
Well, I'll describe organic and not organic for you with the same description because it's the same thing, just about. So take a greenhouse looking structure, 600 feet long by about 40 feet wide, and put 30 to 40,000 birds inside of that thing. And that's chicken and eggs. So meat birds and eggs both live inside of these kind of facilities. It's called a grow house, and they pack the birds in there pretty tight. Birds don't really see the light of day. They mass manufacture these things for either meat or eggs. And, there's a lot of problems with that system. First of all, you're not listening to the way nature does it at all with that system. What you're focusing on is producing something that's cheaper, faster, it's manufacturing 101. But when you try to do that process with food, it kind of backfires on you. We talk about the Industrial Revolution a lot. Back in the 1920s, it was great for planes and trains and automobiles and all these different things, but it really hurt our food system quite a bit. So what you're looking at is this mass manufacturing kind of minimum inputs with the maximum outputs, and trying to produce as much food as possible for as cheap as possible, but it comes at a huge cost. So,
well, how does that hurt the food?
Look, go ahead.
How does that hurt the food? What's the cost with that?
Well, let's look first of all. So, in order to even raise these birds in that environment, you've seen the pictures. You Google factory farming or chicken farming or anything like that. You see it's just one solid row of white birds, on the ground. And the scary thing is a lot of times that's just the top layer. A lot of times they're walking around on top of each other. Chickens have a natural instinct to peck and scratch for bugs and worms and seeds and grubs and whatever they can kind of find. In the factory environment like that, you can't breed that instinct out of a bird. So you got to take it when it's a baby chick, 1 or 2 days old, and you take a hot iron to the beak and you actually solder that beak off so that they're not going to kill each other by pecking and scratching on each other. A lot of times they have to take the talons off of these birds so that they don't, cut each other open and scratch each other open just doing their natural behaviors. You have to use all kinds of antibiotics in order to get them to survive that environment, in order to get them to even lay eggs or to produce meat without dying in that kind of environment. The waste that's produced in those environments is toxic, so they stockpile the chicken poop. You've driven up, like here in California, you drive up through Fresno or Bakersfield or any of these areas, and you can just smell the chicken farms from like miles and miles away. That's the same anywhere really that has chicken farms. If the breeze goes the wrong way, entire communities are affected by the stench and the smell, and it's a pretty bad environment for the animals. A lot of people consider it very inhumane the way that they live out there like that.
Yeah, definitely.
And then it results in kind of toxic meat too. These animals are getting poor feed. They're not getting the diverse natural diet. And then it's kind of bad all the way around. It's bad for the farmers. They don't make any money doing it this way. It's really the big marketing companies that make all the money.
Gotcha.
And then it's really bad for the environment too.
Gotcha. And just on the food stuff there, like what does that do to me then? If I'm eating an egg from a chicken like that, what is happening to me? Because clearly that's what I'm doing. Like, what am I missing out on?
The first thing that you got to think about is the antibiotics. I think that's the easiest one to trace through to humans. So they're pumping these birds full of antibiotics, and these antibiotics are not, tested on humans. They're not, used on humans for sure. They're pretty strong stuff, and every single year they have to come out with new antibiotics to combat the stronger, kind of crazier viruses that these birds are being exposed to.
Gotcha.
And so it's not rocket science that these antibiotics that they're being pumped full of are going to eventually come through into the actual meat, or the eggs or whatever else you're eating.
Mm-hmm.
So antibiotic resistance is like this term that basically means eventually, antibiotics are not going to be able to keep up with the disease. If we keep on trying to make bigger and stronger antibiotics to fight these bigger and stronger viruses, eventually, we run out of resources, and the antibiotics get so strong, there's nothing we can do about them.
I hear you.
Obviously, that's
Wow.
not like a sustainable program, and you're putting that into your body, and so that's something to definitely be aware of.
Right. Wow. And you're telling me if I buy a case of eggs or even some chicken breasts that are labeled organic, that's what that chicken or the meat has come from, that type of environment?
Well, even if it says antibiotic-free, this is where it gets a little bit scary. Even if you buy eggs or meat that says antibiotic-free, there's still a whole bunch of antibiotics that are allowed under antibiotic-free. And you can also say antibiotic-free as long as your veterinarian prescribes those antibiotics. So antibiotic-free actually doesn't mean antibiotic-free at all. If you look at it that way, you're still doing all kinds of antibiotics. That vet works for the farm. You don't think that they're going to take 2 seconds and write a little slip that approves antibiotic use? It's when I really get upset is the deceiving kind of meat labeling that's going on in the industry right now.
Right.
Organic is a good example. You're saying, everybody wants to do the best for their family, especially those of us with kids. So you're spending a lot of extra money to get these organic products. Well, all that organic means is that the U.S. Department of Agriculture has come in and certified the feed that those animals are getting is less than 5% pesticide use.
Oh,
so,
wow.
It has nothing to do with the way the animals live. It's nothing to do with the way that they're treated. None of that stuff.
It's just the feed.
Based on the feed.
Okay.
And that's not too reassuring,
What about the free-range eggs or meat that I buy? What's the difference there? Because I've bought stuff that says organic/free range.
Yeah, and this is another one that bothers me a lot because we're all on a budget. I'm a farmer trying to run my own small business. I definitely understand the budget thing. And you got people trying to make the right decisions for their family. And we have these marketing terms. So free range, take that same 600-foot long by 40-foot wide tunnel with the 30,000 birds crammed in there, and you cut a 5-foot door at the end of that tunnel, and that leads out to a 10 by 10 concrete pad that's 110 degrees outside because it's in Fresno. Now you open that door for 2 hours a day, and technically those birds have access to the outdoors, right?
Right.
So that means that technically those are free range now. All that the farmer did was cut a hole at the end of the door, and now you can charge an extra $2 a dozen for the eggs, and you could charge $1 extra a pound for the meat, and that bird is the exact same bird as what you're getting in a non-free range program, unfortunately.
Wow. And what's up with the double A grade versus A grade? I see that on containers all the time too. Does that mean anything?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I saw that too. I'm pretty sure that just has to do with the size of the eggs. I don't think that has anything to do with quality at all. Gotcha.
All right, so you've really laid out the problem, and clearly I think what you're saying, it just rings to me. That's not how God intended these animals to live. It's not how I would think He intended us to be stewards of His creation. And so how is Primal Pastures different and better?
Well, first of all, I'll tell you, we didn't come up with any of this stuff. There's some champions in the industry that kind of modeled this. And so none of this is original to me. And the guys that we copied would say it's not original to them either. We're just copying nature here. So the cool thing is think about nature and think about a place like the African Serengeti is one where there's a large population of wild animals that we can still study and it still exists today. So the way it works is you have these huge grasslands and you have really tall grass. You see it in Tennessee sometimes, 4 or 5 foot tall grass.
Right.
And you have big animals. So buffalo, bison, wildebeest, these big, like, ruminant animals that come in, they eat the grass. They have to stay in a herd because their only defense against predators, wolves, coyotes, any of that stuff, the only defense against predators is numbers. So they have like a strength in numbers. And so they stay up in this tight herd. They eat the grass below them. They poop all over the ground. And then once it's soiled, they have to move on to the next spot. Behind them comes the medium size. So the deer, the antelope, the kind of, medium-sized goats and sheep is what we replicate that with on the farm. They're going to come through when the grass is like ankle high, and they're going to eat it down to about boot-top high. They do the same thing, poop all over the ground, stay up in a tight herd to prevent any kind of predator death. And then once that's soiled too much, they're going to move on to the next spot. And after that, the last step is the birds come through, so the fowl. So like in nature, it'd be any kind of poultry or, geese, swans, turkey, wild turkey, any of that. We model it with chicken. So the chickens come through last, boot-top high grass. They just so happen to thrive in that kind of environment. They're going to eat that grass down. They're going to poop all over the ground, and then they're going to move on to the next spot. Again, flock animal. They got to stay in tight for protection.
Right. And
after that, it's actually the most important thing happens. So after that, it's the rest, and the land needs to rest for a long time. The nutrients in that poop, in the manure, are the healthiest fertilizer ever created. I mean, God made that to regenerate soil. So what that stuff needs is time in order to soak into the soil, actually be absorbed, and the soil to actually be able to use that, and then, move on. And then that same process is going to repeat itself, maybe 6 months later, maybe a year later. When that grass regrows, it'll actually regrow stronger than it did the year before, and those animals will come through and do that exact same process again. So that's kind of like a long explanation for how we model our farm. So instead of looking at, trying to overlay like man's template on nature, we try to overlay nature's template on man, which is on our farm here. So we lead with the cows, and then we follow that with the sheep, and then we follow that with the chicken, and then that follows a long period of rest. And every single day we're rotating the animals manually because we don't have, predators. We don't want to deal with predators in the farm. So we use like electric fencing to kind of keep the animals in a herd and then rotate them every day. And what that really results in is something that's called regenerative farming. A lot of people now talk about sustainability and sustainable farming. And if you think about it, sustainability is like treading water. So really, sustainability is not that good of a goal. That kind of means you're not getting any worse, but you're also not ever getting any better.
Right.
And what we focus on is called regenerative farming. Every year that we farm this way, the land should get healthier and healthier. And I really think that goes back to the way God designed these animals to be raised and the way that animals live in nature.
Yeah, that's awesome. So hearing all this, what are your goals as Primal Pastures? I know it's not just to make good food for yourselves and your customers. You're actually wanting to make a radical shift in the process of across America and across the world. So what are some of those goals, and what are the things you're doing to help meet them?
Well, we're just like one of many doing this. I don't want to ever make this sound like we're the only ones doing it this way. There's a whole unit of these. It's called pasture-based livestock is usually what you're looking for. And we're just one of many farms kind of doing this thing. But my goal is to try to transition as much of our food production to this pasture-based livestock as possible. I think it's, like I said, it's not only healthier for the animals, it's better for the consumer. It's better for the land. It's kind of better for the environment. It's better every single way except for price,
right?
Which is the one thing that's really going to hold us back for now. But just like anything else, as this thing grows, as we all go from tiny backyard farms to kind of small farms to medium scale farms, our price power is going to go, stronger and stronger.
Right.
The price is going to drop. The economies of scale are going to come in, and we're going to be able to start competing with some of these conventional prices. And to me, at some point, it becomes worth it for almost everybody. There's a certain percentage of the population that's willing to spend 4 times more for this kind of meat.
Yeah.
But that percentage goes up a lot when it drops down to 2 times as much. And then that percentage goes up a ton when it's like you can get such better quality food for 10% more, 5% more. I think you're going to see a lot more people able to adopt this as we're able to come down on price, and that just comes with size.
Yeah, and I like how you said you're not the only farm doing this, which is great. And on your website, I see you have a resources page. You have some links here for different people that I'm assuming that you've learned some of this from, as well as if you live outside of Southern California and would like to find a local farm similar to ours, you got Eat Wild and Local Harvest as links.
Yeah.
So guys, on my blog, andyrasman.com, I will have links to primalpastures.com so you can find this stuff. But just how many farms do you think are doing this sort of thing?
Man, there's hundreds just in the U.S., and they vary in size from I'd say we're probably like one of the medium to bigger sized ones, but especially in other parts of the country, Southern California is kind of like a real food desert, if you will, but Northern California, parts of the Midwest, kind of Southeast, there's a lot of this stuff going on. So
yeah,
Southern California is like the hardest place to find it, but other places around the country, I mean, like Tennessee, I know 4 or 5 just off the top of my head that are doing a real nice job out there.
Like you said, just because of land, right? Is the main deal that's making it?
I don't know, man. I firmly believe there's pros and cons to every place you want to farm. So here, land is kind of expensive and water is hard to come by, but I have 22 million people within an hour and a half of my farm. So I think that there's give and take anywhere that you go. And, I firmly believe this is one of the best places in the country to do this because of the customer base that's all over.
Yeah, good point. And the other thing there too, I've actually been to your farm, at least part of it, because I know it's grown a lot since I was out at the house. But I actually saw how you were like, this is where we had the chickens for this long, and look, it's green grass, and everywhere around that plot was dead grass, because like we obviously, like you said, we don't have the rain that some other places in America have. So it's just very interesting to see how throw some chickens out here and look, stuff starts to grow, which I thought was really impressive. And so it actually got me thinking, like, should I get some chickens at my house? And hearing what you're saying, like, this is something that like maybe people can do on their own, right? Like at their home.
Absolutely, man. I think even more than like buying from one of these local farms or something, that's great. That's definitely something that is a good goal to do. And even if it's like a small percentage of your food spend, and even, anything is good. But I think, if we could go to 10% of people, growing a small garden, like a veggie garden for themselves, just in their backyard, and then having a couple egg layers, you would see a massive shift in the overall food system in our country. And that's something that's been done for a really, really long time. And it's like a skill that's atrophied quite a bit in our country. But if you go back 100 years, you'll be hard pressed. Ask your grandparents or great grandparents what their parents did, and you'll be hard pressed to find too many people that didn't at least have a little garden of their own and a few chickens, for eggs.
No, you're absolutely right. I know my granddad actually grew up on a farm, and that's how they got all their sustenance. And then my dad, they actually had a garden and they canned, and my granddad still had that with my mom. They had a garden and they canned, and for whatever reason from there, it never went to, me for whatever reason. And so I saw a post that, it was a Primal Pastures post on Facebook. I thought it was just massively eye-opening. It was an advertisement from a magazine from, I don't know when, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, not sure. But it basically was a government ad calling for all Americans to have a couple chickens, and that it was the American thing to do. And it basically said, if you don't do this, you hate America, was what I got from it. Is getting others to dive in and raise chickens part of your mission? And if so, like, how are you helping people do that? Like, if someone wanted to do this, what would be the first step that we need to follow in?
Yeah, well, first of all, that ad was actually posted by the USDA.
Okay.
Which is now kind of like the group that, at least in my circle, a lot of people don't trust very much anymore. You see people at the top of the USDA. It's scary almost to research it, but you see people switching back and forth between being a executive at Monsanto, and then going to the USDA, and then going to Purdue. And I mean, there's lobbyist power and all kinds of scary stuff going on. So the USDA is somebody that's not very trusted in 2016, but that ad was actually posted back in World War I. So they were saying, listen, it's your patriotic duty to help the bumper crop here in 1918 or whatever it was, of eggs, and to help us with our food production, because we're having a hard time with food production. But it's the American thing to do is to keep chickens in your backyard. And now, I mean, I couldn't even imagine the USDA saying that now, but back in 1918 or whatever that was posted, that's what they were calling people to do. So that's kind of amazing. But yes, it's definitely one of our missions, man. And it's not a for-profit thing. I mean, every week I'm probably on the phone with people that are getting their coops set up and trying to get backyard chickens going. I just think, I don't have any way to monetize it or anything like that, but I just love it. And so I'm always willing to volunteer my time and answer questions. You know, I think that's just something that it could really change the industry if even 10% of people started to do chickens for themselves in their backyard.
No,
it's not only like the tastiest egg you're ever going to have in your life, you know, fresh egg from your own backyard, but it's a fun thing to do. It's easier than keeping a dog or a cat. You know, it's a great way to teach kids about responsibility. That ad even says, it says something like, even a child, you know, 5 to 8 years old is plenty old enough to take responsibility for a couple chickens in the backyard. It's like, man, imagine that, you know, kids nowadays are viewed as liabilities, not assets. But back then, you know, it's a great way to start teaching your kids about responsibility and taking care and putting food on the table. I think it's pretty cool. Yeah,
that's amazing. So, I mean, you're selling me on this, and I know that you've sold one of my neighbors on it. I was actually, a neighbor a few houses down from me, was building a chicken coop, and he has, not the best land. He had, so it's cut into a hill, and, you know, his house has is standing basically on the side of a hill, and, he has like a little, like, it's basically, I guess, some posts that are holding his house up. So his house is raised, you know, like over the edge of his living room. I guess it's like a 5-6 foot little drop to the ground. And he ended up using that area, that the land there, for his chicken coop. And he took those posts and put some chicken wire and stuff. And I was talking about, hey, like, what got you into this? He's like, well, actually, I went through a tour at a place, he said Temecula, cause I guess that's close to Murrieta, right?
Yep, we used to be in Temecula.
Okay, so he was like, yeah, so I went through this tour at Temecula, this place called Primal Pastures, and I'm like, oh, I know those guys.
Yeah, that's hilarious. How random is that?
He was like, yeah, we were given a tour by a guy named Paul, and I'm like, yeah, I know Paul. So it's pretty cool, and I was like, dang, I probably should get in on this myself. But it was really cool, and actually, Jessica, my wife, to you listeners, Paul knows who she is, she actually just posted something on Facebook the other day showing tours of Primal Pastures, and she met you too. I guess you gave the tour there. So
nice.
I just would like to maybe hear what are these tours? What do people do when they go here? And also just throwing it out there, if anyone's thinking about going this route, if you're in high school right now, you're thinking, what should I do with my life? Like, you know, there's a lot of ways you can make income on this besides just the growing. Like, they're actually doing tours, and I'm sure, like, is that a big part of your income?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a huge part. I would say it's 5% of the total income, but there's a couple things to it that are unique. So first of all, it's basically income-based marketing for us. Like, the best marketing we could ever do isn't, you know, an awesome social media post or even word-of-mouth marketing. It's really like, if we can get people to actually come out, step foot on the farm, shake their hand, show them the animals, you know, that's better than anything else that's possible. So to me, you know, if I can even break even on that, that's still a great thing for the business. So usually once somebody's been to the farm, they've seen the tour, they've kind of gone through the whole spiel, then they're probably going to be a customer for life. And so people spend, in different industries, you spend a lot of money in trying to acquire customers. and like trying to do your marketing and stuff. So if I can have something that actually makes a little bit of money and it's the best marketing you could ever ask for, that's a no-brainer to me. So we do every month we have farm tours and we have workshops too. One of the workshops we do is actually how to kill your own chicken. So we teach people the 5 steps of poultry processing. It's actually a hands-on class where you get your own bird and you take it all the way from a live chicken to, you know, a packaged product. And that's like a very eye-opening thing for people. And then we do, like twice or 3 times a year, we do big events. So potlucks and picnics and like we did a movie premiere and stuff. But 100 years ago, again, the farm wasn't like this background place that just grew food and then you went and bought it from the grocery store. Like it was a community place. It was somewhere you'd really gather. A lot of events were held on farms. And, you know, I think it's an awesome place to host events and stuff. And so we try to do that as much as possible.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, I actually remember one of the shenanigans we had was we killed a rabbit, and I think it was illegal, I heard, to kill a rabbit like that, the way we did it, or just period, I don't know, without a license or something.
I'm sure that was illegal. There's no way that was legal because it was like a wild jackrabbit on campus. It was kind of a slingshot, right?
Yeah, it was a slingshot from Mexico. Yeah, that we got in Mexico. But yeah, like I remember after that, I was like, what do we do with it? You know, and we had to go on YouTube and we found some, and actually it wasn't YouTube. I think we found a site that had just some dude that had pictures step by step. So is this, and I think we pulled it off. We skipped a lot of the steps to make it taste good. Plus probably wasn't the best type of rabbit. It wasn't one for eating, but, or it wasn't the right season for it. How difficult was it for you to figure this out? Because I know you didn't grow up on a farm. You didn't you didn't have this type of stuff in high school or college, I don't believe. So, like, what was the learning curve for you on this?
I mean, look, for me, it was a little bit tough because, again, I didn't have anybody to show me how to do it. And it was like me and my 2 brothers-in-law and my father-in-law, and we were chicken in one hand, like, iPhone with YouTube in the other hand, like trying to just figure out how to do this. But it doesn't need to be that way. So for folks that are interested, you know, there's other places that do this all around the country, but a chicken processing workshop it's a lot of things, man. One, it's a survival skill. So if you know how to do a chicken, you can pretty much do any kind of animal. I mean, the process is more or less the same going from a chicken to, you know, a pig or a deer or anything else. The fundamentals are going to be the same. Second, it's like an eye-opening kind of, I don't know the best way to say it. It's kind of like an emotional experience, though. When you actually take an animal's life and you're kind of taking that life to sustain your own, I think it gives you a whole new respect for animals in general, for the way that animals are treated. It actually associates like that pack of meat that you see in the stores, not just, you know, a cellophane wrapped piece of meat. It was actually a life at one point that was killed so that you could sustain yours. And so we actually get a lot of people that are vegetarian, 10, 15, 20 years vegetarian, and say, look, I wanted to be able to process my own meat. Before I start eating meat again, I wanted to be able to process my own and actually be able to look that animal in the eye and do the deed and just feel like I was being responsible with that. So I think it's as much that as it is the actual skill of knowing how to kind of process your own meat. They're both cool, but I see, you know, we have people crying almost every single time. It's really emotional for some folks. Other people, you know, it's nothing. Maybe you've hunted before, you've done this, and it's not that big of a deal. But every single class, we have a few people that, you know, it's a really emotional experience, and I actually think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. And certainly teaching something valuable. I don't know. I think maybe at this point I want to shift it more towards the angle of God's design here, because I know my podcast here is mostly focused on sharing the gospel and defending it.
Right.
So is this correct that because like I know you've said you've gotten this stuff from a lot of other people. Again, listeners, I'll have a link to their resources page on Primal Pastures. You can dig through those. I saw you had Mark Driscoll as one of those resources. What was this intentionally something that from these people they saw this as a design, attributing it to God, or is this just something that you saw from your Christian worldview?
No, and one of those guys, I definitely have Mark Driscoll on there. He was kind of like my high school and sort of college pastor that I followed a lot. He's not really around too much anymore, but he's somebody worth checking out. Joel Salatin is the guy that I really looked up to, that made this connection between my faith and kind of like this nature and the way that these animals are raised. He's a guy that farms out of Virginia. His farm is called Polyface Farms, and he's like a self-described Christian libertarian lunatic farmer, or so. I forget exactly how he does it, but that's kind of how he describes himself. And he was the first one that the way that he talked about this stuff really made me say, like, man, if Jesus was here now, how would he be farming? Like, how does he want us to steward his land and his animals? And I think that once I started to listen to that stuff about regenerative farming, it all started to make sense to me.
Yeah, definitely. Which is something funny too, because a lot of people I've heard talk about, like when it comes to, like, I don't know, there's different Christian views. The last episode, it's not even released yet while we're recording this, but we talked about, was there death in the animal kingdom before the fall of man? And we were making the argument that if God created the world with death in the animal kingdom, by design, that would not be a good thing. But this is a result of sin, that death entered not just to man, but to the rest of the animal kingdom. And there's verses for that. It's in the last episode, listeners, if you want to dig into that. But something, if you present that type of view of God's created order, it then usually goes to, well, there's, what about death in the plant kingdom? And something interesting I saw there was with plants, when plants die, it is regenerative. Plants are the only thing that I know of in creation where it's by death that they actually procreate or spread or grow more and create more. You kill an animal, it doesn't then give forth, like if you kill a chicken, it doesn't give forth another chicken that way. And so
Right.
It's kind of that regenerative thing was God's design. Death doesn't bring about new life. But in this case, because of the result of sin in the world, God then says, okay, kill and eat. It's fine now. You're no longer in the garden. And the animals as well as you are no longer, supposed to just live off what I created with the vegetables and the vegetation. So I don't know, just, curious on this, as you encounter people along this line, you start to let them see the regenerative aspect of how this is how God designed things. And now, with sin in the world, even having animals and even killing animals and eating animals, this whole thing helps keep the system together. Do you ever get to share the God side of it with people? Like, does that ever come up, on the tours or just as you're meeting with people? And how do they respond to that when they see a God connection? Kind of like with, what you said, the Polyface, farmer,
Right.
What was his name? Joel something you said? Joel
Salatin.
Yeah, Joel Salatin at Polyface Farms. Like, do you get to share that through your work?
We do, yeah. And I think it's one of the most unique platforms because it's this interesting dichotomy where people that are into this stuff, for whatever reason, the demographic is like heavily not Christian. And I don't know why that is. I think it's kind of a budget thing, maybe. I don't know exactly what causes it, but it tends to be people that are, of the world and kind of like they really care about the environment and health, and they care about the humane treatment of animals, but they haven't really made that connection between what we do and with, Jesus who created the world. And so even though it's slight, a lot of times on our like public tours, we don't go full board into, a repentance prayer or anything like that. But even though it's slight, I love seeing the light bulb come on when we say this is the way that God created the world. We're trying to raise animals as close to the way that God created the world as possible, and as close to the way that nature intends as possible. And it's cool to see the light bulb come on with people who a lot of times you don't associate this kind of like green, sort of granola, hippie, you don't really associate that with like a Christian thing. So it's a cool platform to be able to talk to people and be real about it. And like, this is something that I just believe with all my heart. So it's something that I can be kind of passionate about too. So it's a cool platform. And then sometimes we'll have Christian schools and like different Christian groups come in, and then we can go full board into everything and how it all kind of connects, and we can be totally open and blatant about that. That's also cool too.
Yeah, that's awesome. I kind of suspected that most of your clients showing up for these tours were from that demographic you just described. And I was thinking this would actually be a really good opportunity for sharing the gospel, and or at least, like you said, getting the light bulb going off. Like, oh, this wouldn't just come about naturally. It is by design. Right. It does seem thought out. A little too perfect to be by chance.
One of the terms we use on every tour is, intelligent design. And
nice.
It's like certain people, maybe they don't catch it, but when you say that and you kind of start showing them all this stuff, it's like, for me at least, I can read the Bible, I can sit down and I can kind of look at these words on the page, but it really takes nature to like make that stuff come to life for me a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And so when you can see when you can see intelligent design and livestock like portrayed so obviously, it, at least for me, it like really helps me understand what's going on. So it's cool to see that light bulb come on for people too sometimes.
Have you ever had anyone like that follow up or ask more questions on the faith behind that comment?
A lot, yeah, but it's usually people that are either already Christian or they're already borderline, maybe they're like, they already know something about it. I haven't had like the rad experience of somebody that's just completely like non-Christian come and ask me like, hey, what did you mean by that? Like I would love that to happen. It's actually something I really want to improve on with our tours, and just the way I talk about the farm is incorporating more of that, and
definitely
being more intentional with some of that stuff is something I want to work on for
yeah.
sure with my own ministry.
Well, I know for myself, like I've since hearing you share that with me briefly, I haven't been on the tour, I haven't read any of the stuff that you've read, but just hearing the basic presentation that you've given already on it. And obviously going to your farm and actually seeing like, this is dead grass, this is where the chickens were, it's green, and you weren't watering the grass. Like, this is amazing. Like, this does make sense, that it was put together this way, and how much different would our landscape be and our food be if we were sticking to the system and not going completely against what, God had intended or planned. I've been using this sometimes in conversation even and telling people about your farm, just because if something ever comes up along this line, this is a great intelligent design thing. And obviously it's a topic that people are interested in that are not typically Christian or believing in a monotheistic God or a creator God. They're typically nature itself is sacred, or there's this life force in all things, and therefore we need to respect all things. And it's like, okay, where's that come from? What does this come about with? That force is an it. It's not a he or she, so it's not thinking, so it doesn't explain the design. There has to be something above, And so it's just a really great conversation piece, which is one reason I really wanted to have you on, just so listeners can hear that and even think about themselves. I'm curious on this one. I read an article just recently. It was about how being healthy and exercising, eating right, these are actually things Christians are called to do. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, our body's a temple. We're called to be stewards of the land. I think it's an area where, as a community, like American Christians have fallen short on that quite a bit. I think that the Christian community should be the one that's kind of leading the charge on health and, taking good care of the environment, taking good care of our animals, all that stuff. And we're definitely not. I think it's an area that we should take really seriously. And actually, I know that Joel Salatin's working on a whole book about that right now, about kind of how the church is so far behind the times on these issues with health and sustainability, and we should actually be at the forefront of it. I don't mean that as like a charge or kind of like a accusation. I've got plenty of stuff that I need to work on too, but it is an area where I think that we gloss over it a lot, and it's something that we should be paying more attention to. We're clearly called to it in the Bible in several different places.
Well, I mean, if you're obese, obese, you're
right,
and you're called to go to a foreign country to serve and be a missionary. Like, there's a great likelihood you're going to be like, well, I don't know if I'm going to have X, Y, and Z of my junk food or my whatever, and am I even able to, get around without a car? Am I able to build a house? Am I able to serve? And I'm not talking like, work for an hour or two. I'm talking like you're out there in the environment in these rougher conditions without AC, without your heating and stuff. Like, are you able to do that if you're not taking care of your body? And so I think this is really key. I said last episode that I don't make New Year's resolutions, but talking to you now, maybe my New Year's resolution should be get a chicken coop set up at some point.
I like it, man.
Minimum.
I like it.
Minimum.
The reality is, you know what? A lot of this stuff just isn't possible for certain budgets right now. And again, I don't want to be the guy that comes on ever and it comes off like I'm, trying to make people feel bad, or
I haven't heard that.
You can't afford this food, so you can't do this stuff. But the reality is there's small changes you can make that make a huge difference overall. And I think it's really interesting. One of the things that I post every once in a while is this chart that's like 1950 compared to 2012. And the way that your income was spent back in the 50s compared to now. And it's literally, it goes from like 40% of your income used to be spent on food and like 3% on medicine or antibiotics or, whatever. And now in 2012, it was like 20% of your income is spent on, medicine, and like 5% is spent on food. So it's almost like a repurposing or a reprioritizing of the way that you spend your money and your energy. And a lot of these things aren't expensive. You could set up a backyard chicken coop for under $100. Probably under $50 if you're scrappy with it. And, it's actually going to be cheaper than just going to the store and buying eggs or whatever. Same thing with, plant a little garden in your backyard, even if it's nothing amazing. It's fun. It's cool. It kind of connects you back to the earth. It's, totally economical. There's a lot of good things about it.
Yeah, it's good. Hey, you got at least 5 more minutes or 10 more minutes?
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay. So I hopefully I'm not slowing this, but because I haven't made a list of this stuff, but something I came up with. I'm going to give you some questions on terms of like your farming experience and just shoot out, in like a sentence or two, an answer for it. Okay. So what's the funniest thing that's happened to you on the farm?
Oh, man. Gosh, it's going to take a little bit more than one sentence.
Okay, go for it.
At one point, we said, well, in nature, chickens eat meat. I mean, if you go anywhere, like they eat roadkill or they eat downed animals, they eat anything. They're omnivores. So why don't we start collecting roadkill and using that for the chicken feed? And so I went on Craigslist and I posted an ad. I said, anybody who can find roadkill, I'll pay you $5 per animal, and then call this number. And I put my brother's phone number down and didn't tell him that I was doing it. And so he got these crackheads calling at 2 in the morning, 4 in the morning, trying to bring roadkill onto the farm. It was awesome.
That's wonderful. What is the smartest animal on the farm that you've found?
Pigs.
Why?
Pigs are the smartest. They have the largest brain compared to their body size, and you got to watch them. They're like everything about them. The way that they take care of their young, the way that they respect a hot fence, the way they got boards for different kinds of foods. Next up is the livestock guardian dog.
All right, great. What's the dumbest thing you've seen an animal do on the farm?
animals aren't dumb. I've never seen an animal do anything dumb. They're only instinctual, and they're actually pretty cool to watch when you put them in their natural environment. You start to realize that they're actually not dumb animals. They're just following the instinct that God gave them. So the reason people think sheep are so dumb all the time is probably because they're penned up and, you know, they're stuck inside of this dirt lot and all they're trying to do is figure out a way to get out. There's actually, animals don't do that much dumb stuff.
Cool. Again, maybe by design.
Right.
What's the best meal or recipe that you've had from the farm?
Oh, man. I'm a huge fan of the whole roasted chicken, man. I love just a little bit of salt and pepper, whole bird, right into the oven at 425 for like an hour.
All
Maybe
right.
put it on top of a bed of potatoes or something.
All right. Is there anything on the farm that you have refused to do? You're like, I'm not doing that task. No.
Absolutely not. No, quite the opposite.
All right. What's the most difficult task you've had to do on the farm?
The hardest thing about farming is it's 365 days a year.
Ooh.
You know, like Christmas morning, we're out there doing chores. So if you didn't grow up in that environment, like it's hard to even think about what that kind of takes. And like the first 3 years of the business, we didn't have any employees. So, you know, just the day in and day out grind of doing the chores and doing the animals, it does kind of get to you after a while.
Yeah, I bet. What's something that you used to do in the farming that you now would not do in terms of like, this is not the most efficient way, or is this not the best method? So that if anyone's, you know, thinking about going your route, they know not to do that.
Oh man, so many things like that. The thing is when you're starting a business, sometimes you have to do stuff like the dumb way at first, you know?
Uh-huh.
So I would almost have like counter advice of don't worry about like trying to make it totally awesome in the beginning, you know, like be okay with having kind of a crappy process in the beginning and just trust that with time and with more money, it'll get better. But dude, there's like hundreds of things that I think back to how we used to do stuff. One example was like each chicken pen, like when you visited, doing each chicken pen would take us like 15 minutes because it was a manual process. We had to pull the stupid wooden thing and break our backs. And there was so many problems with it, you know, carrying a water jug like 500 yards and all this stuff. That's like all things of the past now, but we didn't have enough money to buy like a tractor. We didn't have enough money to buy a metal pen. So it's just, that's the way we had to do it back in the day.
All right. Last couple questions. First one, what's in store for 2016 for Primal Pastures? What's your goals?
We're going to keep a heavy direct-to-consumer business, so we sell our products online, ship them straight to people's doorstep. That's like really dialed in now. We're going to roll out to statewide shipping, so all of California. We have a new wholesale brand that just came out called Pasturebird. You can check it out at pasturebird.com. And definitely if you know people in the restaurant industry, chefs or anybody like that wants to do, you know, wholesale like commercial account stuff, we would love to get into that business too. So those are the big three.
What about a 5-year plan?
Well, eventually we'd love to have Primal Pastures in all 50 states or at least like 30 states.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if that would happen in 5 years, but I love the local farm concept just for the pure purpose of like knowing your farmer and being able to visit the farm. So instead of shipping nationwide, I want to start a ton of small Primal Pastures all over the country, and like grow it that way. In addition, I'd love to have like a retail store, you know, where people could come onto the farm and buy milk and eggs and meats and all that stuff too.
Yeah, that's amazing. Hey, any closing websites, advertisements, plugs you'd like to give?
Oh, good question, man. No, I really don't have too much other stuff. I mean, I would just like to give my personal email out for anybody that's interested in this stuff and wants to follow up. It's paul@primalpastures.com. Especially with sort of this faith kind of Jesus angle to this whole farm. I love those conversations. If anybody's interested in starting their own thing, more than happy to help. I'm only 4 years into this, but anything I can do to help you out on your journey, I'd love to. We need more farmers in this country desperately, especially people that are paying attention to this kind of stuff. So, hit me up, paul@primalpastures.com. I'd love to chat with you.
Good. And Paul, something from our college years, I remember a day you told me once, I feel like the Lord has called me to make lots of money. Do you remember that? Or do you still feel like you were called?
I actually remember that vividly.
Do you still think you're called to that?
Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't done a very good job of that calling yet. I built a couple nice businesses, but they don't make tons of money for the church yet. It's an important role for people to fill in the church. There's different people have different strengths. I know that I'm gifted with business, and God's opened every window with this business. It's just been unbelievable. If you look at our story, I wish I had 12 hours to detail some of the crazy stuff that's happened, but
I'll give a link to
done something great with this. So.
I'll give a link to some of the other stories on the blog post for this episode, so listeners can find some of that other stuff, because it is really impressive. I think the amount of crowdsourcing you've been able to get, the way in 4 years, just to see what has happened. I remember it pretty clearly when you told me that, and what you threw in there too is you haven't been able to make it for the church. That's one thing that stood out to me is this is probably going to happen, because you said that what you would do is give it to the church. And another thing, when you told me that, I was like, that makes sense, because I remember we were at Laguna Beach once, and there's a boardwalk, and some crazy guy was just telling us, "Oh, I hate this boardwalk. It's getting so old. There's all these splinters, blah blah blah. If I had money, I would sue the city." And you're like, "If I had money, I'd build a new boardwalk." And I was like, perfect answer. And so again, you're very generous with your money. I just want to throw out there, because if anyone wants to support them, it's going to be going in the right direction and in the right place. And, I'm glad just to see what God's doing with you, Paul. So thanks for taking the time to be on the show, and I hope it's been a blessing to listeners.
Man. It's an honor to be on. I love everything you've been up to. I follow it closely. So.
Cool. Awesome. All right. God bless you, Paul.
You too, Andy. Thank you.